Does that make for a good background? I can't tell. Hello, people of the future. My name is Roman Elric, and I have a quarantine beard. I'm not sure if it looks good or not, because I cannot judge my own appearance.
Because I'm taking quarantine seriously. Stay at home, kids.
Today we're going to be looking into the mind of Jake Paul, which is interesting or terrifying depending on how you want to look at it, but we're going to be doing it anyway. Back in 2016, Jake Paul was still on Disney Channel, and Vine was not quite dead yet. I'm not aware if Vine was announced to be dead by or future dead by the time he started writing this. I doubt it, because he makes no mention of that. But he was a Vine star at the time. He was on Disney Channel at the time, and he was 19 years old at the time, which is very apparent in this book, but we'll get to that later. So, first impressions here with the cover. I know the cover is not the most important part of a book. You're not supposed to judge a book by it, but I do not think this fits Jake Paul's personality. Like, putting aside everything about Jake Paul, his whole thing is that he's strange and weird and quirky. I've got this problem with him trying to be so serious. This isn't a bad cover per se, but it doesn't fit the tone of the book, and it doesn't fit the tone of Jake Paul, his vines, his acting, anything. And then there's the back of the book, which, sure. But if you look at other YouTuber books, they often fit the personality of the channels better. I haven't read any of these yet. I plan to. But if you look at, like, Shane Dawson's more recent book, It Gets Worse, this is kind of silly-ish, you know? And then this is, like, pseudo-serious on the back. That fits Shane Dawson pretty well from what I understand. I don't know, I stopped seriously watching Shane Dawson in 2012. But from what I understand, this still kind of holds true to him, or at least it did when he wrote this. If you look at Dodie's book, this is cute, it's pastel, and vaguely sad, which, follows the tone of her channel perfectly if you're aware of her channel. The Try Guys book here, which is colorful, it shows off their personalities on the front and the back, and, they also have pictures, especially the Try Guys and Shane Dawson. I'm finding myself comparing to Jake, because they tend to be silly personalities, and they put their faces on the front of the book. And Jake being the kind of person who at the time made vines about, like, jumping off of stuff or just being goofy. One of his more famous vines is him and Logan, his brother Logan, just flopping around on the floor like fish. I don't think this fits along with that tone. But getting away from the cover, because you're not supposed to judge a book by it, let's get into what is this book exactly? Because I think I know what this book is, but I'm having a difficult time putting a label on it, if that makes sense. Because it seems from the description, they call it a memoir. I don't know. He seems to go on in the beginning about how this is going to inspire you. So at first, I thought, is this actually a self-help book? Not even close. It's 19-year-old Jake Paul's little life story. And that would be fine. There are ways to make that interesting, to make that into a memoir. A 19-year-old can write a compelling memoir. Everyone has an interesting life story. Jake Paul has a very interesting life story, but that's not what makes him unique. He can't just lean on that and hope to be interesting. And he's not. I know that Jake Paul has a whole lot of stuff around him. He did then, he definitely does now. But I just want to talk about this as a book. Okay, so we're just talking about this as a book. He starts out the book after his dedication to his fans, which is kind of cute. He has this thing that's like, it's like a dictionary definition of you gotta want it. When you pursue a dream, when you pursue a passion, dream, or desire with a single-minded purpose of making it real. 2. The act of being so determined that nothing can stop you. 3. What do you tell yourself when the odds are stacked against you, but achieving your goal still seems possible, even if you're the only one who believes it? This is what made me think at first that maybe this was going to be a self-help book. Also, this thing at the end of the About Me page, where the About Me page is mostly bullet points. He talks about what he's eating as he's writing, which is an interesting choice. I'm not saying that that's inherently a bad choice. It's just that Jake has so many of these little tidbits and extras in this book that I don't feel like he's earned, if that makes sense. Like this. He goes, "My brother Logan is standing next to me. He says this book should be titled 6 Seconds, and he's telling me it should be all about girls. But I say, no, this book is all about," and then the next bullet point is, "That's a good question. What is this book about?" He's also got an annotation at the bottom there that says, DM me. He says that a lot in this. I actually tried to DM him on Twitter after I read this book, because he told me to DM him so many times. But yeah, he has those turned off on Twitter if you don't follow him. I guess that's understandable. He has so many millions of followers. But he tells people to DM him so many times in the annotations. That is strange to me. He also starts with, "Hi, my name is Jake Paul," but you probably knew that. I do not know what to think of that opening line. After he gets out of the About page, he gets into his life story, and he admits that he doesn't really read much, and he dreads opening books, and that's fine. You can write fine books when you haven't read a lot, but that doesn't really go to establish credibility with your readers. He also talks about Zoosh, which is a very cute idea, actually, that he and his older brother put together when they were younger. My biggest problem with this is that he calls it a memoir, but it reads like baby's first nonfiction essay. It's like, how do I describe it? It's like a What I Did Over the Summer report, but with swears in it. And he doesn't use those much either. He bleeps them out because, and this is true, Jake Paul's audience is mostly children, and he knows this. He also talks about the first time he ever had sex, which is interesting. He doesn't go into super explicit detail about that, though. I watched Drew Gooden's sort of review of this book, along with a bunch of other YouTuber books, and in his video, Drew claims that it's like 50 Shades of Paul. I don't think it's like that at all, but it is very interesting how he describes women in here. I have a lot of pages marked in here because there are a lot of interesting parts, let's say. As I'm flipping through this, I noticed some of the annotations I marked, and one of them, he's talking about going through puberty, and the annotation he gives for that part is, "How come puberty is acceptable to you to use in conversation and pube isn't?" Which is another one of those things that might be interesting in another context, but with the way Jake writes this book, I still don't know if he's earned the right to do that. He has a lot of annotations in this book, and this is one of the longer ones. And it's during when he's talking about the first time he was ever started noticing girls. Kind of like, sexual romantic awakening period when you're in middle school, early high school, which is a normal thing to talk about. And he says, I'm going to read this part of this to you. He says, "One note about this chapter in my life and book. I realize that I am describing situations that make it seem as if I objectified women. I didn't then and don't now. These young women were all excellent students, funny and athletic. Though we might not have discussed world events or literature, we shared insights about topics that interested us as typical teenagers." And he goes on a little longer. But it's very interesting that he is aware of that, or someone made him aware of that, because he doesn't change how he describes women in any of the rest of the book. I get that he's a straight guy, and he notices how pretty girls are. That seems to be the only way he knows how to describe them. I didn't know what any of his guy friends look like. If I wasn't active on social media, I wouldn't know what Logan looks like either. I know what Jake looks like from this, I guess, and I know he talks about how athletic he is a lot in this book, but it's like the women, I feel like I could just sketch out their hips right now. Maybe it's not that dramatic, but you know what I mean. The thing about Jake Paul's little life story is that he was only 19 when he wrote this. It's not a problem. You can write an interesting memoir when you're 19. There are two other issues. The first main issue, he's only 19. Second main issue, he's had an incredibly privileged childhood. He talks early in the book about how his parents were divorced, but he said it happened when he was very young, so it never bothered him. And both of his parents loved him very much, and they were both very well off. So he and his brother never had to worry about money. They were always at the center of attention, both of them fighting for the center of attention all the time. They got in the local newspaper. They did wrestling, which he claims is like a major sport in Ohio. I wouldn't know. I'm not from Ohio. I'm from California. High school sports aren't as big of a deal here. But, you know, he just goes on and on about how he was so attractive to ladies early on. He goes on about how he was competing with his brother. He goes on about how supportive his parents are. And it's like, all that is wonderful. But it seems like there's almost nothing bad that has happened, according to what you've put in this book, with your little shirtless pic on the back. Your cover is so serious, but you know, I struggle finding difficult things that have happened in your life. There are a couple main things that are bad that happened to him. It's that the first thing is that in his first major high school wrestling competition, he lost right away. And he said that's something that stuck with him for years. The second thing is that also in high school, he was peer pressured into helping steal a phone one time. And the third thing is that his junior year of high school, which turns out to be his last year in public high school, he finished high school online, he was bullied for having a large social media following. And being bullied is a terrible thing. I experienced bullying throughout my life. But at that point in the book, I found it very difficult to feel bad for you, man. You'd just been bragging about your accomplishments constantly. And you hadn't... And this brings us to the third major problem with Jake Paul's book, is that he didn't take the time to get the skill required to make it interesting. You can totally make a quiet, privileged childhood seem interesting. So many people have done it before, but it takes skill to do that. He doesn't have this big tragic event in his past that he can lean on. And he didn't take the time to do this. He didn't take the time to get better enough to just justify not taking the time to get good at writing. And I am sure, like most other people, that this was just to make money. And that's probably why the shirtless pic on the back. Because, like, I can find writing potential in almost anyone. And I've found a couple of interesting things in here. Like most of them he didn't earn. Like an entire page filled with just the word girls. Girls, 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 girls. And, you know, if he were funny throughout the whole book, I would have loved that. But he wasn't. But anyway, getting to the positive, the one thing very good that I decided to highlight. He says, he's talking about some stupid things he's done in his life. And I'm going to read these last 2 points on his bullet point list of stupid things he's done in his life. In 8th grade, I helped some friends egg a house. This was before the time the cops caught and detained us, and I'm purposefully not going to say anything more about it because I don't know the statute of limitations on acting like a jerk. Next bullet point. That same year, I also helped some friends TP a house. Address purposefully withheld because, again, I don't know the statute of limitations on being a jerk. That is really cool line. I like that line. I just wish he had taken the time to learn how to do more things like that. If he, I don't know if it was a deadline. I don't know if he just didn't care and just wanted to make money off of this. But this is, I don't know, I feel like there's potential in your life story, Jake Paul. If you ever see this, you probably won't. And you just... I don't like just giving negatives on a book. But this is just hilarious. It's very interesting to get into the mind of someone with an ego that big and a life up to that point that perfect. At this point in Jake Paul's life, he's 23. He's a year and a half older than me. I'll be turning 22 soon. And, you know, he's been through some stuff.
I'm still gonna send it.
He's been a jerk. He's cheated on girlfriends. He's had scandals on YouTube. His brother has had scandals on YouTube. He's run a company. He's made a whole lot of money. And if you watch one of his recent blogs, which I did in research for this video, he's saying that he at least claims, and I don't know if any of this is true, because in the past he's lied about things in his vlogs before for entertainment, but he claims that he has brain injuries now.
I think I have holes in my brain. I feel really stupid lately. Yeah, bro, I got a new big hole right there.
From boxing, from all these stunts he does that he talks about in this book that he did from a very young age. You know, he talks about his mom letting him and Logan jump out of windows. And if you look into it, his brother also claims that he has brain injuries from this lifestyle they have. And yet he continues to do these strange stunts, and he continues to train in boxing.
No!
I just wonder what his line of thought is behind all of that, if this is true. You know, things like the fight that happened recently, things like his brain injury, things like, you know, ex-girlfriends and learning from his mistakes, that would all make much more interesting material, I think, than 19-year-old Jake Paul had to say. I think 23-year-old Jake Paul has had a lot more experiences, and maybe if he wrote about all this stuff, I could perhaps put up with a bit more of this, whatever this is. I read books relatively fast, and something like this is no more of a burden on my time than a bad movie marathon. In fact, a bad movie marathon, if there's more than 3 or 4 movies, might be more of a burden on my time than this. This took me about 4 hours to read. I don't think I will be rereading it, even though it only takes me 4 hours to read. I skimmed through this to make notes in it, and normally when I make notes in a book, I reread it because I don't like skimming. I didn't want to read this again because it's, like I said, it's like baby's first nonfiction essay. A lot of people, when they write their first nonfiction essay, I used to do this too back when I started in high school, they just write about their day, or they start like when I was born, and they just tell you events in order. And that's what Jake Paul did throughout this book. And if he was an older person and this was his autobiography rather than a memoir, that might be acceptable. But he was 19 when he wrote this, and he called it a memoir. A memoir is different from an autobiography. There's this essay, I'll put up on the screen the author, because I'm terrible with names, but she talks about nonfiction as like a flowing river, and on one end of the river is the biography, and close to that the autobiography, and on the other end is poetry. And the memoir is supposed to be below, it's supposed to be somewhere in the middle, in between those two things. It's supposed to be slightly poetic. It's supposed to be a form of art. It's not just conveying information. And I feel like Jake Paul is just conveying information. And given his track record, I don't know if he's telling the truth. And I don't want to be so mean to a book, even one written by a person with as big with an ego the size of West Texas. I just don't like that this got published. And I know why it got published. I've talked to people in the publishing industry. I haven't been published myself yet, but I've talked to people that have gotten published. I've talked to literary agents, and, you know, YouTubers are great for publishing companies because they have so many followers. And Jake Paul has a lot of followers. He had a lot of followers then. He's met famous people. He's met Justin Bieber. He's met people at parties that he talks about in here, brags about. And I just... It makes a lot of money. And so books like this are going to keep getting published with workout routines in the back. He drops his workout routine. Also, an interesting thing is, near the beginning, this rubbed me the wrong way for some reason, on behalf of people that don't like reading books and just bought this because they like Jake Paul's work. Because, like, near the beginning, he said, if you don't like books, I've inserted a chapter near the end called Just the Good Parts, so that you can skip to that and just get the good parts. And I thought, well, that ought to be like a summary, right? Or like some motivational speech, something that's going to pump you up to go out and achieve your goals, whatever those goals might be. You know, whether it's being big on social media, whether it's going to college, not going to college, you know, whatever. It's just a list of good things. It's just a list. Like, mornings, the jelly inside a donut, friends, accomplishing a goal. If I was a person that didn't like reading books, and he told me I could just skip to that chapter, I'd feel very confused. I'll be honest with you. I thought it would be a too long didn't read kind of chapter. But it wasn't. I read through the whole book to get to that part. The whole time that was in the back of my mind, wondering, oh, how is he going to summarize this up? It's just a list. It's just a list. And then there's all these random pictures of him, which they're very good pictures. I'll give him that. Like that. That's a pretty good picture. I mean, not everything is bad. There's a lot of things I don't like about this book, but those are some good pictures. And then we'll get back to another couple things that enrage me. 10 thoughts I'm having right now, which I think demonstrates his attention level while writing this book. The 10 thoughts he's having right now, or he was in 2016, I guess, is who wants to go to dinner with me? Black bikinis. Always ready for the gym. Hard work beats anything. Can't worry about what everyone else is doing. I wish my truck had wings and could fly. It always feels good to sleep in your own bed. Sure. People really confuse me. Well, I guess we have that in common. Thumbs up to friends. I can't believe it. I won the Powerball. And then he has an annotation there that says, kidding. I'm just practicing when I do win. What would you do if you won? DM me. Again, he tells us to DM him. And then there are parts of this that are written notes from his friends and his family members, from his mom, his dad, his brother, his girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, his friends. And there's an annotation here written by his mom when he and Logan were living in an apartment together. They now live in their own separate houses. You've probably seen them. They're too big. Then she says in this annotation, their apartment was and still is like a frat house. I don't even know how many people live there. Logan and Jake text people when they need someone for a video, and 10 minutes later, people start flying in on hoverboards. 1 minute, I'm taking a bite out of dinner, and then the next minute, there's a girl lying on the kitchen counter pretending to give birth to the Easter Bunny, or someone is smashing plates or jumping out of a box. Yeah. I would say that poor woman, but the Paul's parents have been involved in some scandals as well, and I will not get into those. But yeah, her parts were actually some of my favorite in the book, which is interesting because this isn't her book. As my old writing teacher used to say, she can write her own damn book. Oh, and then the last thing in this book that made me barf. Let me turn to it. Besides the epilogue just telling you how to get more followers. Kind of feels half-assed. Like everything else. Okay, after he tells us about when he was bullied his junior year of high school, he says at the end, "Note, this was a tough chapter to read, but it had a happy ending." And then he gives us a little happy face. Ooh, a happy face. And then he says, "I can do a better happy face than that." There's not a lot of things when I'm reading a book that make me just want to stop and barf. But I usually try to not be mean when I'm critiquing a book, like I said, even if I don't like the author, but I just feel like no effort went into this, and that makes me so mad. If Jake Paul were a classmate of mine and he gave me this book and he told me to critique it, I could give him so many notes. I could help him work on a second draft. I don't know that he ever went past a second draft, if I'm being honest. I do not think this book was ghostwritten. This definitely feels like the ramblings of a 19-year-old egomaniac. But that's all I have to say about that. Overall, I would give Jake Paul's You Gotta Want It 2 quarantine beards. Just 2 quarantine beards. Because, yeah. Thanks for watching my channel. Comment below any other YouTuber books you'd like me to review. I am planning on turning this into a series. Comment below. Like if you want to help the channel. Give somebody a link to it if you think that they hate Jake Paul or just want to know more about this book. And I'll see you around.